But everyone here has policy, like, and everyone lobbies here. But for federal, we got to make sure our members of Congress do what we said. And Angel's congresswoman's supports one of our tax bills. She actually is sponsored one of our. So we've had a lot of people here really are happy that she did it. But tell us, like, people here are always trying to get money. We're talking about, should we get money from the government? Should we not get money from the government? How do you get earmarks? How do you leverage your member of Congress in this era to get appropriations, et cetera, for projects you have going on? And I'll start with Angel, and then we'll do Arthur. So.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me again. First of all, it's perfect timing because they announced they started the appropriation process today, and we have 2 weeks to submit all the requests.
2 weeks, you guys heard that? 2 weeks if you want to submit your request.
Yeah. Appropriation. Yeah, the appropriations process officially started today. They released the rules. I didn't read it, but I know they released the rules today. And it depends on who the majority is. Sometimes the Democrats used to support non-profit project, but now since last year, it's all local government. It's very difficult. For-profit cannot qualify, and they have specific rules. So if you call your members of Congress, I'm sure each member of Congress has workshop they do to educate the constituent and help them apply for federal grants. Now you have the appropriation project, you have the community project, they call community project, usually sponsored for local government and so for some NGOs. So I have not read the entire rules, but in a nutshell, it's you have 2 weeks to submit information. These are specific guidelines for that. Your members, if you call the members' office, I'm sure by tomorrow on the website you will see the announcement, and you will see the portal. They release a portal, and then you follow your information, mostly the one that you submit when you want to request for grant for your organization. It's almost the same thing. Who the sponsor, what's the project, the numbers of years, the numbers, and things like that. But most of the members, the Congressman Sheffris McCormick is organizing, every year we do workshop for our constituents to help them go to the process. The local agencies, local government agency, they all have their lobbying firm here who will call their members and go through a process. But that's all I can say.
Yeah, and I was going to say, to add on what Angela's saying, who's actually on the Hill and helping orchestrate these things now, is that when you're dealing with appropriations, it's programmatic language, or the specific earmarks for money for your organization that you could request. And one of the tips for how to do this is to do it via multiple offices, because once you have multiple sign-on and support by members of Congress, it gives more credibility and aegis to what you're doing. And the greater the likelihood is that you'll get money for your funding. And so one of the ways to do this is to develop a letter. You want to make it easy for Hill staffers. Develop a letter if you've got an organization explaining the history of your organization, probably like 1 page, and explaining what the money will be used for. And again, you would have to decide whether, in consultation with the staff at that office, whether it falls under a program or something specific that you would request from the office or from the government for your particular organization. And you float that with several, not just one. Say, okay, I hit one member of Congress, I'm good. You've got to get a number of members to support it. And once you have a champion, once you've got one member to say, yeah, I support this, they will likely do a dear colleague or take what you've written and share it with their colleagues to move it forward. So it's a simple process. It is not very transparent, as most things in life aren't. But if you take the time to do it, so insofar as we were talking about historic preservation and the like, it's worth the opportunity to try it. And so maybe on the first instance it may get denied, but when you do it, things do change. I've seen programs and I've seen entities get funded, may not be the first time, but the second time, and so on. But it's worth the effort to do it. And you can hire outside lobbyists to help you, or simply do it yourself. There's no gatekeeper with doing these. Yeah.
What's the time? So 2 weeks for everyone to submit their.
Yeah. So they opened the portal. They will open the portal because everything is submitted electronically.
Okay.
And then after that, they close and they start campaigning. So as Arthur said, you can work with the staff who's championing the issue. Most of the time is the member from your district, and sometimes not. For community project, it has to be. For programmatic project, it doesn't have to be. It's by issue.
What's the difference between programmatic and community?
Programmatic is for if one particular, not CPG is money that goes directly for the person who are applying. The grant that goes to Kevin, you're applying for this grant, it goes to you. Each member has a number of community projects they have to sponsor.
Okay.
They submit, you can submit 20, and maybe they can approve 3 or 4 or 5. It depends what the majority agenda is. If they decide not to support immigration, for example, they're not going to approve supporting immigration. So that's for the community project. For the appropriation for the program, and it's all about the programs.
Okay.
So once you advocate for that program, it doesn't say means that it's going to go to you.
Gotcha.
So, but you just advocate for that particular program.
Gotcha.
If a member is championing veterans affairs or healthcare for veterans, so then the organization that is supporting that, you just submit the opportunity, you make the request there, and then you will send it to your colleague, ask members to support healthcare for veterans. So what I would also recommend for advocacy group to do is, while inside we send out their colleague, you should also call your members, like any legislation, call different members, ask them to, hey, support this appropriation request.
Okay.
That will make our job easy.
Now, does the Senate have earmarks this year? Do they have are they going to do earmarks?
I'm not sure. I need to confirm. I'm not sure. I don't follow the Senate.
Okay. Arthur?
I don't know for the Senate. I don't work for the Senate, but I was going to also offer that you can also reach out to your congressional offices, namely the House offices, because they also have information for how to apply for grants. And so I know that's one of the things we discussed today. You share with the staff, usually in the district offices, what you're interested in or what you're seeking funding for, your small business or whatever your issue, and they can help you, which is a big resource. They won't write the grants for you, but they can identify the grants, and I guess to the best they can review grants, but they cannot write them to help you get access to information you might not have otherwise. Again, particularly when it comes to things at the government, a lot of things are opaque. So it's even at DC grants, district grants within the states. Like I worked for a member from Atlanta. There's opportunities there. So, yeah.
I don't need to belabor this, but I want you guys to hear that part from them. Any questions? Okay. Well, guys, it's been. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you? So I've seen where federal nonprofits that are national in scope campaign for particular earmarks or programs, and then when the grant requirements were written out and they competed for it, they were actually lost out on those grants for whatever reason. It went to other organizations. Is there an approach that a national organization can take with respect to earmarks that are community-based? I mean, if they're national in scope, I think you kind of have to figure out, but what are some ways that you can apply for like local community-based grants if you're national in scope?
If you're national in scope, the question is, where is your headquarters?
It's actually in Washington.
So then that means that your primary sponsor should be the member from Washington. But if you're a charter organization, for example, with different regional offices, they can apply for grant in different offices. But that's for community project. If you apply, if your sponsor, the member, advocate for it and get it, it depends on the seniority, it depends on many issues. Because there's some set aside. It's given that every member has certain number of projects they will sponsor, that the majority will approve. That's number one. Before we're programmatic, it's a good thing that you already know that it's not enough to advocate to get money in the program. Some companies, I have a few examples. It was from the private sector. People just know they hire somebody, a government affairs person, who advocate for, I think it was $50 million for a program, and then And then they got the program, they were signed into law, they were all happy. The guy got his bonus. But down the road, they gave the money to the competitor. So, but the person in Washington has his money. So, but the person who's fighting to get the contract down the road didn't get his commission, but it was not his fault, because you have to make sure the money is appropriated, but you also have to advocate to be on the receiving side as well. So once you know that, you be careful. You make sure you just don't celebrate when the money is, unless you have your deal knowing that, okay, you get paid for the money. So end of the year bonus or something but just make sure that it's not enough. You also have to continue to advocate and make sure you follow and make sure that you're on the receiving end.
Yeah, I would just add too, so the fight doesn't end with just appropriation. That's part of the battle, right? So once you get language in the appropriations bills, you then have to fight to make sure that the project gets funded. Right? That's the other thing. So you may have some numbers on paper, but it may not be fully funded. And so the fight continues, and so generally people do hire outside counsel or lobbyists to make sure that not only do they have the money on paper, but their organization can then access it by getting funding. So that's the complete story. And that process begins now. The appropriations bills may come out, October, something, before, well, it could come out later, hopefully before October 1, which is when the fiscal year starts. And then the fight begins for the appropriations, or the budget, making sure that there's funding in those, there's full funding for the appropriations.
Anybody else? Well, thank you guys for staying around and answering those questions for us.
Oh, that was quick. No more questions?
No, you not enough questions. One more question?
I don't know. So has anyone used the appropriation process? I mean, this is an opportunity. I think it's something that you ought to take advantage of.
Yeah.
It is, like I said, it is not a automatic thing, but to get into the practice of doing it, maybe it may get denied this year, it may get denied the subsequent year after the committee and the members get familiarity with you and your organization and or your request.
No, that's one of the things we're working on here is make sure people learn to advocate more for themselves and through this process. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, and then, okay, so we got time. So the other thing is, too, I'll just say, you should know, really, that's the last thing. I think it's important, when you're here in Washington, to avail yourself of the opportunity to petition Congress. People always say, well, do I have to be a lobbyist? Do I have to know what to say? You all are activists and represent your organization. At a minimum, I think it's important that you share what your organization does with the Congress. Why? Because it is a way to get things to change potentially, but two, I've noticed just being in the rooms talking to many of you, you're experts on what you do. And so the Congress doesn't know about that, and they don't know that you have this expertise. And so when you're meeting them, you're not just asking for appropriations and asking for programmatic language, you're also saying, I am here. You may not know, but there's an issue with, as you shared, maintaining the resonance of African American communities on the National Register. That was news-shattering to me, and I'm sure members in these areas, whether it's Chicago or Atlanta, where there's a great many of them, they may not know either. And so I think it's incumbent upon us that know things, that know this stuff, to share that knowledge with the members. And if you may not even have the answers, so you say, look, this is my problem. What solution could you and your staff offer me? Because we all are smart people, we can think by ourselves in our silos, but the beautiful thing about the Congress is when those staff get together, they talk to the other staff, they can provide more options and brainstorm together, which we ourselves singularly may not be aware of. So I'm not saying that they're going to have the answers, but I'm saying it's another opportunity and another tool that you have, because there's so much disconnect between us as citizens and then what big bad government does. We know they tax us, right? We know they do, they monitor us and that kind of thing, but there's also an opportunity for us to petition the government. And when Kevin and I have talked about it so many times, we don't often petition the government. And I will say, there are other communities and organizations, so you mentioned, they will petition the government. And they'll say, hey, I'm here, this is my problem, how can you help me? But some of them have become so adept and adroit at petitioning, they know specifically what to ask for. And so that's why I'm sharing. There's no mystique behind it. There's no mystery. Everyone could walk into the Congress, and invariably the House members will meet with you because you're a voting constituent and you represent organizations. So they'll listen to you. And so it's just then the next step is when I have their audience and I have their ear, how do I make a presentation that's cogent and that's going to move the needle? But you have that opportunity.
Sorry, I'm probably not going to phrase this very elegantly, but what is your sense, right now, we talked about like immigration not being an initiative people are receptive to. How the anti-DEI fervor, like what is your sense how receptive members would be to diverse-led organizations that are focused on civil rights?
Sure. I like this. Now the audience has come awake. I love it. And so, and I think it's the energy is waning. So, like, I think this is important. But yeah, DEI, and we've had these conversations too privately. So over the years, we've called it affirmative action. We've called it DEI. We've called it ESG. All the things. That is more subterfuge. I wouldn't buy into that. We are still diverse communities. We still have interests. And so you will find people. I wouldn't go to a Republican and start talking about, hey, how are you going to help a DEI organization? Because they're going to say, we're not going to help you. That's quote unquote woke. But you will find allies, and we both worked for CBC members and others. There is a community where you can talk to and have them petition and work for your behalf. And so DEI is verboten. It's a term that nobody's really talking about, and certainly the White House and the administration. But those issues are still very real, and you can talk to members. And so I would suggest, a lot of the not to bring politics into it, but everything is political. A lot of the Democratic offices are aware of what DEI means. You don't have to use any strange lexicon or special words that you might have to do for some of the majority institutions, because they still have DEI, but they don't call it DEI. They use other nomenclature so that it sounds, I don't know, different. But the CBC certainly is a place that you can go. The Democratic Caucus, which leans progressive, is a place that you can go. And I think you ought to lean into that and talk about those things to make sure that your industry, or rather your company or your corporation, your nonprofit, is on the menu, so that it's being discussed. And like I said, you can offer yourself as a witness. So you're saying, hey, I've got this expertise in black preservation. I just go back to that. And you say, should you ever have a hearing on this? And you've got to figure out what committee potentially will be talking about this. Could be judiciary, whatever. Could I be a witness for, Democrats or Republicans? Because then you're sharing your expertise in a much broader context, sort of nationally. So I hope I answered your question. But yeah, don't stop. I mean, as Dr. Steele would say, and I always say when I come here, you have to keep agitating. It almost feels like a Sisyphean feat, because we do it all the time. And you're like, well, what are things going to change? When I was talking to the young man that was talking about antitrust, I also have done a lot of antitrust work. And we were talking about how it was a crescendo moment 4 or 5 years ago when we thought the standard in antitrust was going to change. Well, it didn't change. And we had a sidebar afterwards, but you got to keep trying. And yeah, it hurts, it's tiring, but you gotta keep at it. And that's why I think it's so important, even to be involved in the voting process. As simple as that. People say, why should I vote? It doesn't change anything, whether it's Democrat, Republican. Now we're talking partisan politics. Things don't really change, but over time, things do change. But it's at a glacial place, just like when the law moves. The law doesn't move quickly. It's a slow process. And so similarly, agitating at the legislative level is slow. And so I would offer, talking outside of my purview, you have to move intra-systemically and then extra-systemically, meaning you've got to be outside agitating and doing things outside of the systems that we know, and then using the systems and the modalities that we know, petitioning the government, you're writing your briefs, you're picking cases to challenge so that you have an essential question that the courts can then resolve. All of those are important in terms of a strategy to move the needle. And the needle may only move just a little bit. But that's what we have to do.
Now, of course, just to build on what you're saying, the new term they're using, inclusion, excellence, which is a whole lot in nature. You don't have to call it diversity. And I had a company called Diversity Works, and we knew when Trump took over, was it gonna work? So we just switch the name, do the same thing in a different way. Because when we need to use the word in, everybody understands, everybody in the room knows exactly, all the CEOs, they know exactly what we're talking about. So when we need to bring the word in, we bring it in a different model, in a different way, and they are very receptive, they understand.
Especially in terms of market access, you have to speak the language that they will understand. Let's give one example. Since I do global affairs, if you advocate for funding from humanitarian assistance, for example, if you go to certain members, you tell them, okay, you need to, people are dying, they may not respond to that. But if you tell them that this program on USAID's partners, the suppliers are farmers. When you cut this program, you're cutting opportunity for so-and-so farmers in Florida because they are supplying World Food Program with those goods that are shipping to Haiti. You cut this program, that means you're targeting the port because all the shipment of those goods are coming to the port. So that's the language I understand. It depends on who you're talking to. Or DI, you say, okay, if you want to sell your product to these people, or if you want to reach $100 million sales, you need to frame your strategy to reach out to so-and-so customers. Then they will understand the language then telling him about DI. They'll understand the language of the pocket.
Well, question?
So I'll be honest, when you were speaking about the appropriations, I don't understand that concept. That's probably why I didn't ask the question. I don't know if you can, let's do many things so you can understand what it is. And then the thought that comes to my mind without understanding what it is, if you do get funding or whatever from the government, do they now have a stake in your stuff? Like when we were talking about the 8A thing, now they can get all your, you're signing on for them to have access to everything that you have done. Does that make sense?
You're there.
So appropriation is grant money.
Yeah, I think people want to explain in layman terms. Y'all are doing it, attorney, SY attorney. She wanted to explain in layman terms.
Sure. I'll just say briefly, and then Kevin and Angela can augment. It is the opportunity for you.
So go back. Explain her appropriations process, the government fund, how government funds the country.
It's how the government funds the country. So every year, the fiscal year is September 30th to October 1. And so the appropriations is the amount of money that is funded for the government to keep the government running. And then as the government is running, you can then petition for money once it has been slotted, so it's appropriated, it's there on paper, then it has to be funded, and it's funded through various bills. You can then ask the government to fund your project or your company as well in the appropriations. So if you represent, I don't want to say any names, but you represent the the ABC corporate, nonprofit or company, and you're helping underprivileged people get access to something. I'm making this oblique so that I'm not, getting too specific. You can then petition the government for funding X amount of money to do something, keep the lights on or whatever, hire, staff or fulfill the mission of your organization. And then to do that operationally, what you would do is you would write a letter to the Congress, to the House, and you would tell them what your organization does, who you are, what your organization does, why the money is needed with supporting information and material. And then if the congressperson agrees with it, you would then say, okay, you think this is a good idea. You understand the ABC Corporation. It's a legitimate corporation. You agree with the mission that we're trying to do. I've asked for this amount of money. You think that's appropriate? Because they can also go higher or lower the various offices. After that, step 2 would be then to ask the members of Congress to get other members to sign on. Because in Congress, one person, one vote is not going to do anything. You have to get a majority of individuals to agree with your position. And it's no different with the appropriations letters. If a majority of the caucus, Democrat or Republican, agrees with your idea, it is more likely than not that it will get funded. That gets put into a matrix because there are thousands of people asking for money from the government to do various things. That gets put into a matrix, and then the appropriators, their staff and the appropriators, will weight which program or which organization gets priority, and then it'll appear in an appropriations bill. Your company, if it's earmarked, and then the number that the company gets, or a program. So if it's ABC corporations dealing with, underprivileged people, as we mentioned, it may be earmarked for a particular account at a particular agency within the federal government. It could be, HHS, or if they deal with, underprivileged or homeless people or whatever. If that makes sense, and then if it's appropriated to the agency, you can then petition the agency for grants, because the agency's got $5 million allotted for homelessness or whatever. So I think that's steps explaining it in a very basic way, but it's an opportunity to get funding and access to funding for the ideas and the organizations. More to the point, the organizations and the programs you're working on.
Let me try to make it a little bit more simple. For money to go to people, it has to be authorized, and then the government has to cut the check. So now, we authorize by law. We say, okay, we're going to allow the government to support animal and build zoo everywhere. That's authorized. So then the government knows they can build zoo to take care of animals everywhere. Then now they have to cut the check. So to evaluate, that's why you have the programs. So people are coming and say, okay, I will have animals at the zoo, I have animals at the zoo. They submit the request, go to the member of Congress. Okay, it will cost me $1 million to take care of animals at the zoo here in Louisiana. So then they'll put that amount. And then all the members will support that amount, that the government, the Congress will know, this is something that everybody wants. You may have a chance to have money for the zoo. And then they will tell the government, okay, Department of Animal, we give you $1 million, $10 million to spend on zoo. So you have a zoo now, you want to have access to that money. Then you go now, once they release, this is at the beginning of the year, we're going to spend money on zoo, a request for proposal, then you apply for that money. That's number one. Now, number two is each member of Congress they give each member of Congress the chance to bring money home. So each member of Congress is sponsoring certain projects. That's what the community project. So when we start this appropriation season, the constituent will say, okay, I will have a zoo, I have a library. They go to your members and tell our members, these are all the projects that we have for our communities. The Congress will just sponsor, will submit this appropriation request for all those projects. And then Congress will decide, okay, every year we're giving 10 projects for Democrat, for minority, and we give 15 projects to majority. And then they will decide, if you request 10, they may approve 5. And they say, okay, we have approved this project, and that's the money will come to the district. Not necessarily in the same year. Sometimes the language is in a way that you think, they approve it, therefore I have money. It's for the next fiscal year. So and then they give money to the district. That's why you see members do ceremonies and signing checks and giving checks, because those are the community, because they understand the process is long. If not, you can be a member of Congress for 10 years and never bring money home. So they create an opportunity to make sure members are bringing money home. That opportunity to do the signing ceremony and give checks for daycare, but it's not a lot. It depends on the majority and who does what. But those are the two, if that makes sense, the two initiatives you have in terms of money. The grants, the grants.
Are they all grants, all the money in both ways?
Yeah, they're all grants. It's not investment.
Process of applying.
There's a process to apply for it, but once they give you government money, most of the time it's grant. You're not paying it back. But if you use a loan, you have a special agency who provide loans, SM, small business loan, blah, blah. But all those programs is grants.
Is there a rule of thumb, although the request would vary by organization, but is there a rule of thumb in terms of the size of the request?
So I would say anything under $500,000 doesn't score, right?
So if you ask for if the government gives you $500,000 or not, it doesn't count against the budget numbers. So keeping your number under $500,000 is probably the standard.
I'm going to add some other things, and hopefully it adds some more clarity to this. With appropriations generally is how the government gets funded. We agree with that. Every year you'll read in the press that the government's not going to get funded, and so in the meantime, the government passes continuing resolutions, meaning that they keep the funding levels at the previous year's amount. There's no change. Appropriations can go up or down, and this is where we talk about the petitioning process. And so either the CR will happen. If the CR does not happen, as what happened last year, then the government doesn't get funded and the money runs out at a specific time. Usually the fiscal year is September 29 or September 30th rather to October 1. But if there's been a continuing resolution and both sides and both chambers agree, it could be extended. And so the money is extended at last year's levels. But if there is never an agreement on a final appropriations bill, which sometimes happens, the CR stops and there's no appropriation going forward for the next year. That's when we have a shutdown. And I wanted to say, importantly, another way when you're petitioning the government, one of the things you can do is not only can you offer to be a witness and share your ideas about your company, your organization, or the ideas that you're thinking about, you can also draft bills. And why do I mention that now? When you draft a bill, every bill has a score. Every bill is going to cost something. And when you're drafting the bill, you don't have to know this, your staff will do it, but I'm just saying it for completeness, they will determine where the money would come from. So if you're doing a criminal justice reform bill, for example, as a hypothetical that keeps, juveniles from being housed with adults in the federal prison system, it would come under the criminal justice, CJS, criminal justice and science bucket, money given to DOJ. And so in the authorizing language at the end of the bill, so the bill has all this substantive stuff, thou shall not house children under 14 with adults in the prison system. That's a no-brainer, very simple hypothetical. But then at the end it'll say, and to do this, it will cost $10 million from the DOJ budget. And so you have to make sure, one, the DOJ has budget to do that, and then there's the cost amount. Again, not something you have to worry too much about unless you get pushback from the staff, but that's just how the bills are made, how they work, how the process works. I don't know if that answered the question a little more about appropriations, CR, shutdown, and then how you can get money. And then the thing that people may not know, I didn't know until I worked on the Hill, I didn't really think about it, every bill costs something. The bills aren't free. You can say, again, thou shalt not spit chewing gum on the side of the road. There's a cost with that. I don't know what it's going to be, but there's money associated with that.
All right, guys. Thank y'all.